Well, hello, it's Miss Gina, and I am in Newcastle West, County Limerick, and I am in the city center, and this is a castle, and that is a knight on a horse statue, and this is the town. And I have with me a book called Irish Myths and Legends. And I thought we would read a story called Connor the Brave. And Connor didn't learn to read and write in school like you did. Hopefully you've learned to read and write by now. Some of you may still be learning your letter sounds, and that's okay too. And some of you may just be starting to read and you're not real good at it yet, but you just keep practicing and keep listening to books and trying to read them. You'll get the knack. And so here's a phrase. It says, once upon a time. And most fairy tales and legends and magical myths start with once upon a time. So once there was a boy named Connor the Brave. And once upon a time, in old Ireland, there was a widow who lived in a little stone cottage. She was very poor, and all she had in the world was her son, Connor. All he had in the world were the ragged clothes on his back. In fact, his clothes were so ragged, he was too embarrassed to go to school. Connor was too embarrassed to go to school because of his clothes. This meant Connor couldn't read or write, but it also meant that he could do a great deal of things that other people couldn't. He could run huge distances without stopping and climb tall trees. He could scale high walls, ride horses bareback, and skim a stone 50 times across the lake before it sank in the water. If there had been a competition for stone skimming, Connor would be a champion of the world. Sadly, there was none, so Connor had only himself to play against. One morning, Connor's mother called to him, "We need more firewood." Connor put down his stones and thought a while about where best to fetch the firewood for the day. "I'll go to the big forest over the other side of the lake and fetch some more," said Connor. "Oh no," Connor's mother said. "I've heard tell of strange things happening of late in the big forest. Can't you go to the wood down the lane?" But Connor was no coward. "Don't worry, Mother," he said. "I'm not afraid of anything." He set off at once with his axe, singing a happy tune. The birds sang brightly too as Connor walked, but when he entered the forest, all sound died. Connor thought it was a bit odd, but just carried on walking until he found some fallen branches. He set about chopping up firewood, whistling as he worked. Soon he had a respectable pile, and he gathered it up and set off home. As he turned, he was met with a monstrous sight. An enormous giant was standing in his path, leaning on a huge twisted walking stick. What could that mean? Yum, yum, yum. Breakfast, the giant roared. Connor wasn't scared. He just kicked the giant's stick away, bringing him tumbling to the ground. Quick as a flash, Connor tied up the giant's hands and ankles with the string he used for his firewood. "No!" the giant howled. "No, don't hurt me." "And what will you give me if I don't?" said Connor. "Take my stick," said the giant. "It's magical. It will win any battle you use it in." Intrigued, Connor picked up the enormous stick. At once, it shrunk down so it was the perfect size for him. He put his firewood on one shoulder and tested out his new stick for size, then took off merrily with his firewood. "Hey, you haven't let me go," yelled the giant as Connor marched away. "Never said anything about letting you go," shouted Connor happily as he disappeared through the trees. As he was walking home, Connor passed a little village. All the villagers were crowded around Harold with a long scroll. So he pushed to the front of the crowd to see what was going on. "The King of Leinster grieves," called out the herald. "His beautiful daughter has not laughed in 7 years. Princes and kings cannot even make her smile. She says she will marry the man who can make her laugh." Connor dropped his firewood and rushed off to the king's palace, forgetting all about his errand for his mother and the poor giant in the forest. The palace was quite a distance away, but he ran and ran as fast as he could with his new walking stick in his hand. And without stopping, as he neared the palace, he could see that there were men from far and wide queuing up for their chance to amuse the princess. When you're in the queue, it means you're in the line. Jugglers and mimes, comedians and clowns filled the courtyard in front of the palace. Connor jostled nearer the front of one after another. They all failed to make the princess laugh. Even a juggler who tripped on his own shoe and dropped all of his balls didn't manage to get the tiniest smile from the princess. She just sat there with her chin on her hand. Her chin on one hand, looking fed up and bored by the antics of all the hopeful men. The king sat beside her, tapping his feet on the ground as he grew more irritated by the antics of all those who had come and failed to make his daughter laugh. As Connor stood on tiptoe to get a better view, a soldier yelled, "Oi! This isn't for the likes of a ruffian like you." Suddenly, Connor was surrounded by guards. Everyone stopped and looked around just as Connor bonked one of the guards on his helmet with his new walking stick. Down went the soldier, who went crashing into the soldier next to him. They all fell in a spiral like dominoes, tumbling to the ground. There was a hushed silence around the courtyard, and then there came the smallest of giggles. It was the princess, who laughed and laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. She beamed down at Connor, and then the king began to roar with laughter too. At last, someone who could make his daughter happy. Connor looked around him as all the other hopefuls stared at the scruffy young man in disbelief. "Does this mean I have your hand, princess?" stuttered Connor, not quite believing his luck. "Well, maybe," smiled the princess, "but first let's find some proper clothes." So off they went to the palace tailor, who found a smart set of clothes for Connor. Connor looked very handsome in his new outfit, and soon he and the princess were laughing together. The king was delighted too. Before long, the herald was traveling the land with news of the happy marriage of the princess and Connor, the champion stone skimmer. You may be wondering what happened to Connor's mother and the giant. Well, no sooner had the walking stick knocked down the palace guards than it flew into the air and returned to its rightful owner. The giant had, of course, freed himself in the meantime, was very happy to have the stick back again. He vowed that from that day forth, he would be very careful to hold on tightly to his stick, which had magically grown back to its original size. Connor's mother was invited to live in the palace, where she kept a proud eye on her son, and they all lived happily ever after. Next time it'll be the fisherman's son and the Grogok of tricks. In the meantime, I'll make sure I'm pronouncing that word correctly. I hope you enjoyed that. Remember to read more in 2024 and grow your brain. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.